The castle clock struck midnight as Prince Alexander pressed his ear against the cold stone wall. He had been waiting for this sound all evening. Now he could finally leave his room without anyone seeing him. The young prince was only 16 years old, but he had learned many secrets about the castle during his life there. Alexander pushed against a loose stone in the wall. The stone moved, and a small door opened behind his bookshelf. This was one of many secret passages in the old castle. His grandfather had shown him these hidden ways when he was just a little boy. Back then it was just a fun game. Tonight it was much more serious. The prince stepped into the dark passage. The air was cold and smelled like old dust. He carried a small candle to light his way. The flame danced as he walked, making strange shadows on the walls. Alexander knew these passages very well. He had used them many times to explore the castle or to get away from his boring lessons. Tonight was different. Tonight he was meeting someone who had sent him a secret message. The message had come from Elena, a servant girl who worked in the kitchen. She had written only a few words. "Meet me in the rose garden at midnight. Very important. Your father is in danger." Alexander had known Elena for 2 years. She was 18 years old and very smart. She could read and write, which was unusual for a servant. Elena often brought food to his room and they had become friends. She was one of the few people in the castle who treated him like a normal person, not like a prince. The secret passage led down many stairs. Alexander's feet made no sound on the stone steps. He had learned to walk quietly during his many secret trips. After 10 minutes, he reached a door that opened into the castle gardens. The prince pushed the door open slowly. The night air was cool and fresh after the stuffy passage. He could smell the roses blooming in the garden. The moon was bright, giving enough light to see the paths between the flower beds. Alexander walked carefully toward the rose garden. His heart was beating fast. What did Elena mean when she said his father was in danger? King William was a good king, loved by most of his people. Who would want to hurt him? The rose garden was in the center of the castle grounds. Tall rose bushes grew in neat rows, creating small paths between them. During the day, it was a beautiful place where ladies came to walk and talk. At night, it was quiet and full of shadows. Alexander heard a soft sound behind one of the rose bushes. He walked toward the sound, holding his candle high. Then he saw Elena. She was wearing a dark cloak and looked very scared. Her hands were shaking and her eyes kept looking around as if someone might be watching. "Elena," Alexander whispered. "What is wrong? What did you mean about my father?" Elena looked at the prince with worried eyes. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The paper looked old and had been handled many times. "Your Highness," Elena said quietly, "I found this letter 3 days ago. I was cleaning Lord Blackwood's room when I saw it on his desk. I know I should not have read it, but something made me look." Alexander took the paper from Elena's hands. He held his candle close so he could read the words written on it. What he saw made his blood turn cold. The letter was written in a code, but Elena had already figured out what it meant. She had written the real words under the coded ones. The letter talked about a plan to kill the king during the harvest festival. The festival was only 5 days away. "This cannot be real," Alexander said, but his voice was shaking. "Lord Blackwood has been my father's friend for 20 years. He would never do such a thing." Elena shook her head. "I thought the same thing at first, but then I found more papers. Look at this one." She gave him another piece of paper. This one had a list of names on it. Alexander recognized many of them. They were all important men in the kingdom, nobles who had positions of power. Some of them came to dinner at the castle every week. "These men are planning to kill my father," Alexander said slowly, as if saying the words would make them real. "But why? What do they want?" "They want to put your uncle on the throne," Elena explained. "Prince Marcus has been talking to these men. He promised them more money and power if they help him become king." Alexander felt sick. His uncle Marcus was his father's younger brother. Alexander had always liked him. Uncle Marcus brought him gifts and told him funny stories. How could he want to hurt the king? There is more, Elena said. She looked around again to make sure no one was watching. They plan to blame the murder on the people from the northern villages. They will say it was because of the new taxes. This will give them a reason to send soldiers to take over those lands. The prince stared at the papers in his hands. Everything Elena said made terrible sense. The northern villages were rich with gold mines. Many nobles had wanted to control those mines for years. His father had always said no, wanting to protect the village people. What should we do? Alexander asked. Who can we tell? If these papers are right, we cannot trust many people in the castle. Elena bit her lip nervously. I do not know, Your Highness, that is why I asked you to meet me. You are the only person I can trust, but we must be very careful. If these men know that we found their plan, they might try to hurt us too. Alexander folded the papers and put them inside his shirt. They felt heavy against his chest, like they were made of stone instead of paper. He now carried a secret that could save his father's life or get them all killed. Thank you for bringing this to me, he told Elena. You are very brave. Not many people would risk their lives to help others. Elena smiled, but she still looked scared. Your father is a good king. He has been kind to my family. When my mother was sick, he paid for her medicine. I could not let these evil men hurt him. The prince and the servant girl stood in the moonlit garden, both understanding that their lives had just changed forever. Alexander was no longer just a young prince learning to read and ride horses. He was now the keeper of a deadly secret. Elena was no longer just a kitchen servant. She was part of a dangerous game that could end with death for all of them. We must meet again tomorrow night, Alexander said. I need time to think about what to do. Can you find out more about their plans? Elena nodded. I will try, but I must be very careful. Lord Blackwood has been watching me strangely since I found the first letter. I think he suspects something. The two young people said goodbye and went their separate ways. Alexander walked back through the secret passage to his room. Elena disappeared into the darkness toward the servants' quarters. Neither of them slept much that night. Both of them knew that the next few days would decide the fate of the kingdom. Captain Marcus Thorne woke up before the sun rose, as he had done every day for the past 10 years. He was 35 years old and had been protecting Prince Alexander since the boy was 6. Marcus was not just a guard to the prince. He was like a big brother, a teacher, and a friend all in one person. Marcus put on his uniform and checked his sword. Everything had to be perfect when protecting the royal family. He had learned this lesson from his father, who had also been a royal guard before him. The Thorne family had served the crown for 3 generations. When Marcus arrived at Prince Alexander's room, he found something strange. The prince was already awake and dressed. This was very unusual. Alexander was known for sleeping late and complaining about getting up for his morning lessons. Good morning, Your Highness, Marcus said, opening the curtains to let in the morning light. You are up early today. Did you sleep well? Alexander was sitting at his desk, but he was not reading or writing. He was just staring out the window with a worried look on his face. Dark circles under his eyes showed that he had not slept much. Good morning, Marcus, Alexander replied, but his voice sounded tired and stressed. I could not sleep. I kept thinking about strange things. Marcus had known the prince for 10 years. He could tell when something was bothering the boy. Alexander was usually cheerful and full of energy. Today, he seemed scared and nervous. What kind of strange things? Marcus asked, sitting down in the chair across from the prince. You know you can tell me anything. That is what I am here for. Alexander looked at Marcus for a long moment. Marcus had always been honest with him. When other people told the prince what they thought he wanted to hear, Marcus told him the truth. When the prince made mistakes, Marcus helped him learn from them instead of just saying everything was fine. Marcus, Alexander said slowly, what would you do if you learned that someone wanted to hurt my father? The guard frowned. This was a serious question. I would find out if the information was true. Then I would tell the king and make sure he was protected. Why do you ask this? Alexander reached into his shirt and pulled out the papers Elena had given him the night before. He had read them many times since returning to his room. Each time he read them, They seemed more real and more frightening. "Someone gave me these papers last night," Alexander said, handing them to Marcus. "They show that people are planning to kill my father during the harvest festival." Marcus took the papers and began to read them. At first, his face showed that he did not believe what he was reading. Then, as he read more, his expression became serious and worried. "Where did you get these?" Marcus asked, looking up at the prince. "A friend found them," Alexander answered. He did not want to put Elena in danger by saying her name. "Someone who works in the castle and saw them by accident." Marcus read the papers again, more carefully this time. He recognized the names on the list. These were all powerful men in the kingdom. Some of them came to the castle often and ate dinner with the royal family. "This is very serious," Marcus said finally. "If these papers are real, your father is in great danger." "But how do we know they are not fake?" "Sometimes people make up stories to cause trouble." Alexander had expected Marcus to say this. It was hard to believe that people they trusted could be planning such an evil thing. "Look at the handwriting," Alexander said, pointing to one of the letters. "I have seen Lord Blackwood write many times. This looks like his writing to me." Marcus studied the writing carefully. He had also seen Lord Blackwood's handwriting before. The prince was right. It did look very similar. "Even if this is real," Marcus said, "we cannot just go to the king with these papers. He will want to know how we got them. If your friend took them from Lord Blackwood's room, that could be seen as stealing. Your friend could be punished even if they were trying to help." Alexander had not thought about this problem. Elena could get in serious trouble for taking the papers, even though she was trying to save the king's life. "Then what should we do?" Alexander asked. "We cannot just let these men kill my father." Marcus stood up and walked to the window. He was thinking hard about their choices. Outside, he could see the castle courtyard where guards were practicing with their swords. Everything looked normal and peaceful. It was hard to believe that danger was hiding inside the castle walls. "We need more proof," Marcus said after a few minutes. "We need to find out if these plans are real. We also need to know exactly when and how they plan to attack the king." "How can we do that?" Alexander asked. "We need to watch these men carefully," Marcus explained. "We need to listen to their conversations and see who they meet with, but we must be very careful. If they find out that we know about their plans, they might change them or try to hurt us." Alexander felt a little better knowing that Marcus believed him and wanted to help, but he also felt scared about what they were planning to do. "Is it dangerous?" Alexander asked. Marcus looked at the young prince seriously. "Yes, it is very dangerous. These men are not playing games. They are planning to commit murder and take over the kingdom. If they discover that we are watching them, they will not hesitate to kill us too. But we have to try," Alexander said with determination. "My father is a good king. He cares about the people. We cannot let these evil men hurt him." Marcus smiled a little. Even though Alexander was still young, he was brave and cared about doing the right thing. These were the qualities that would make him a good king someday. "Yes, we have to try," Marcus agreed. "But we must be very smart about how we do it. First, we need to talk to your friend who found these papers. I need to know exactly where they found them and if they saw anything else suspicious." Alexander felt nervous about this idea. He did not want to put Elena in more danger. "My friend is very scared," Alexander said. "They are worried that someone already suspects them of knowing something." "Then we must be extra careful," Marcus said. "Can you arrange for me to meet this person somewhere safe?" Alexander thought about this. The rose garden had worked well for meeting Elena the night before. It was private and had many places to hide if someone came looking. "I think so," Alexander said. "But it would have to be at night when fewer people are around." Marcus nodded. "That makes sense. Tonight after the evening meal we will meet your friend. I want to ask them some questions and see if they can help us gather more information." The rest of the day passed slowly for both Alexander and Marcus. They went through their normal routine, but both of them were thinking about the dangerous secret they now shared. Alexander had his regular lessons with his teachers. Marcus did his usual duties protecting the prince and watching over the castle. During the day, Marcus paid special attention to the men whose names were on the list. He watched Lord Blackwood during the afternoon council meeting. He noticed that Lord Blackwood seemed nervous and kept looking around as if he was worried about something. Marcus also watched some of the other nobles who were on the list. Several of them met together for private conversations during the day. When Marcus tried to get close enough to hear what they were saying, they stopped talking and looked at him suspiciously. All of these small signs made Marcus believe that the papers might be real. The men were acting like people who had something to hide. That evening, after dinner, Marcus and Alexander walked together toward the rose garden. Both of them were nervous about what they might learn from Elena. They knew that once they started investigating this conspiracy, there would be no turning back. "Remember," Marcus told Alexander as they approached the garden, "we must be very careful about what we say and do. Our lives, your father's life, and the future of the kingdom might depend on the choices we make in the next few days." Alexander nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility on his young shoulders. He was no longer just a prince learning about ruling a kingdom. He was now part of a dangerous mission to save his father's life and protect the crown from those who would steal it through murder and betrayal. Elena was waiting in the rose garden when Prince Alexander and Captain Marcus arrived. She was hidden behind a large rose bush, and her hands were shaking even more than they had been the night before. When she saw Marcus with the prince, her eyes grew wide with fear. "Do not worry," Alexander whispered to Elena. "Marcus is my most trusted friend. He has promised to help us." Marcus looked at the young servant girl carefully. She was small and thin, with intelligent eyes that showed both fear and determination. He could see why the prince trusted her. There was something honest about her face. "Thank you for being brave enough to bring this information to the prince," Marcus said gently. "I know this must be very frightening for you." Elena nodded but did not speak at first. She was not used to talking to important people like Captain Marcus. In the castle, servants were taught to stay quiet and do their work without asking questions. "I found more papers today," Elena said finally, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "Lord Blackwood had a meeting in his room this afternoon. After he left, I went to clean and I saw new letters on his desk." She reached into her apron and pulled out 2 more pieces of paper. These were different from the ones she had found before. They looked newer and had been written recently. Marcus took the papers and held them up to the moonlight so he could read them. What he saw made his face turn pale. "These letters talk about the exact plan for the festival," Marcus said to Alexander. "They know where the king will sit, what time he will arrive, and how many guards will be with him." The papers showed that the conspirators had been planning this attack for months. They had studied the king's habits and the castle's security. They knew exactly when the king would be most vulnerable. "There is something else," Elena said nervously. "I heard Lord Blackwood talking to someone today. I could not see who it was, but I heard them through the door." "What did they say?" Alexander asked. "Lord Blackwood was worried about something," Elena explained. "He said that someone might have seen the papers. He told the other person to watch all the servants more carefully." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If the conspirators suspected that someone knew about their plans, Elena was in great danger. "Did you see who Lord Blackwood was talking to?" Marcus asked. Elena shook her head. "I was too scared to look, but I heard the other person's voice. It was someone I know, but I cannot remember who." Marcus began to understand how dangerous their situation really was. The conspiracy was not just about a few angry nobles. It involved people throughout the castle, people who could be watching them right now. "Elena," Marcus said seriously, "you must be very careful. If these men suspect you know something, they will not hesitate to hurt you. Can you continue to work normally without making them suspicious?" "I think so," Elena said, but her voice was uncertain. "I have been trying to act the same as always, but Lord Blackwood has been looking at me strangely. Yesterday he asked me questions about my family and where I grew up. He has never asked me personal questions before." Alexander felt worried about Elena's safety. She was risking her life to help them, and he did not want anything bad to happen to her. "Maybe Elena should leave the castle," Alexander suggested. "She could go stay with family in another town until this is over." But Marcus shook his head. If Elena suddenly disappears, the conspirators will know for sure that someone has discovered their plans. They might change their strategy or move faster than we expect. Elena looked at both men with brave eyes. I do not want to run away. The king has been good to my family. If I can help save his life, I want to do it. Marcus admired the young woman's courage, but he was also worried about her safety. They needed her help to gather more information, but every day she stayed in the castle put her in more danger. If you are going to stay and help us, Marcus said, we need to be very smart about how we communicate. We cannot meet like this every night. Someone might see us. They spent the next hour planning how to share information safely. Marcus suggested that Elena could leave messages in the secret passage that Alexander used. There was a loose stone near the entrance where papers could be hidden. I will check for messages every morning, Alexander promised. If you find something important, put it there and then find a way to let me know. Elena agreed to this plan. She also promised to listen carefully to any conversation she might overhear while working in different parts of the castle. Over the next 3 days, Elena gathered more disturbing information. She learned that the conspiracy involved even more people than they had first thought. Some of the castle's own guards were part of the plan. They had been promised money and better positions if they helped the conspirators succeed. This news made Marcus very worried. As the captain of the guards, he had thought he knew all of his men well. The idea that some of them could be traitors was shocking and painful. I need to find out which guards are involved, Marcus told Alexander after reading Elena's latest message. But I must be careful not to let them know I suspect anything. Marcus began watching his own men more carefully. He noticed small things that seemed strange. Some guards were having private conversations that stopped when he came near. Others seemed nervous and avoided looking him in the eye. One guard in particular caught Marcus's attention. Thomas, a young man who had joined the guard unit only 6 months ago, had been asking many questions about the king's schedule and security arrangements. At the time, Marcus had thought Thomas was just eager to do a good job. Now he wondered if there was another reason for all the questions. Meanwhile, Alexander was struggling with the weight of the secret. He had to continue his normal lessons and activities while knowing that people around him were planning to kill his father. Every time he saw Lord Blackwood or one of the other conspirators, he had to pretend that everything was normal. The hardest part was not being able to warn his father directly. King William continued his daily routine, not knowing that death was being planned for him. Alexander wanted desperately to tell his father everything, but Marcus had convinced him to wait until they had more proof. If we tell the king too early, and he confronts these men without enough evidence, they might deny everything, Marcus had explained. Or worse, they might move up their timeline and attack sooner than planned. On the 4th day after their first meeting with Elena, something happened that changed everything. Elena discovered that the conspirators had been watching her. She found evidence that someone had been going through her personal belongings while she was working. When Elena left this information in the secret passage, along with a note saying she was very scared, Alexander and Marcus knew they were running out of time. The net was closing around all of them. We cannot wait any longer, Marcus told Alexander that night. Tomorrow is the day before the harvest festival. If we are going to stop this, we must act now. But acting was easier to talk about than to do. They still did not know exactly how the attack would happen or who all the conspirators were. They had pieces of the puzzle, but not the complete picture. What if we are wrong about some of this? Alexander asked. What if we accuse innocent people? Marcus had been thinking about the same question. The evidence they had was strong, but it was mostly stolen papers and overheard conversations. In a court of law, it might not be enough to convict anyone. We have to trust what we have learned, Marcus said finally. The risk of doing nothing is too great. If we are wrong, we can apologize later. If we are right and do nothing, your father will die. That night, neither Alexander nor Marcus slept well. They both knew that the next day would bring the most dangerous challenge of their lives. They had to find a way to save the king without getting themselves killed in the process. The castle felt different to both of them now. What had once seemed like a safe and familiar place now felt full of hidden dangers. They could not trust the people around them. They could not be sure who was loyal and who was working for the enemy. As dawn approached, Alexander and Marcus prepared for what might be their last day in the peaceful castle they had always known. Tomorrow everything would change. Either they would save the king and stop the conspiracy, or they would fail and watch their world fall apart. The web of suspicion had grown so large that it seemed to touch everyone in the castle. Friends had become potential enemies. Trusted advisors had become suspected traitors, and two young people who had stumbled upon a terrible secret now carried the responsibility for saving the kingdom on their shoulders. The morning of the harvest festival dawned bright and clear. Prince Alexander woke with a feeling of dread in his stomach. Today was the day the conspirators planned to kill his father. He dressed quickly and hurried to check the secret passage for any message from Elena. When Alexander reached the loose stone where Elena left her messages, his heart sank. There was no new message there. Elena always left something, even if it was just a note saying she had nothing new to report. The absence of any message could only mean one thing. Something had happened to her. Alexander ran back to his room, where Marcus was waiting. The guard could see immediately that something was wrong. Elena did not leave a message, Alexander said, breathing hard from running. She always leaves something. I think they have discovered her. Marcus felt a cold fear creep into his heart. Elena had been their eyes and ears inside the conspiracy. Without her, they were almost blind to what the conspirators were planning. We need to find out what happened to her, Marcus said. But we must be careful. If they have taken Elena, they might be watching us too. Alexander and Marcus made their way carefully toward the servants' quarters. They had to find Elena without making the conspirators suspicious. Marcus told other guards that he was doing a routine security check before the festival. When they reached the kitchen area, they found Elena's supervisor, an older woman named Margaret, who managed the servant girls. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely. "I am looking for Elena. I need to ask her some questions about security for today's festival." Margaret looked worried. "I am sorry, Captain. Elena did not come to work this morning. She has never missed a day before. We sent someone to check her room, but she was not there. All of her belongings are gone." Alexander felt sick. Elena had disappeared completely. Either she had run away because she was too scared, or the conspirators had taken her. "When was the last time anyone saw her?" Marcus asked. "Yesterday evening," Margaret replied. "She finished her work and went to her room as usual. This morning her bed had not been slept in." Marcus and Alexander exchanged worried glances. They both feared the worst. Elena had been discovered, and now she was either dead or being held prisoner somewhere. "Thank you," Marcus told Margaret. "If Elena returns, please let me know immediately." As they walked away from the kitchen, Alexander grabbed Marcus's arm. "We have to do something. We cannot let them hurt Elena because she tried to help us. Right now, we do not even know where she is," Marcus said sadly. "Our first priority must be protecting your father. That is what Elena would want us to do." Alexander knew Marcus was right, but it felt wrong to give up on Elena. She had risked everything to help them, and now she was gone. They spent the morning making preparations for the festival. Marcus increased the number of guards around the king, but he had to be careful not to use any of the guards he suspected of being part of the conspiracy. The problem was that Marcus was no longer sure who he could trust. The conspiracy seemed to have people everywhere in the castle. Even some of his most experienced guards might be working for the enemy. At noon, Alexander made a decision that terrified Marcus. The prince announced that he wanted to speak with his father privately before the festival began. "You cannot tell the king everything yet," Marcus warned. "We still do not have enough proof. If you accuse Lord Blackwood and the others without solid evidence, they might be able to convince the king that you are imagining things." "Then what should I do?" Alexander asked desperately. "Just let my father walk into their trap?" Marcus had been thinking about this problem all morning. "Tell your father that you have heard rumors about possible trouble at the festival. Ask him to be extra careful and to stay close to guards you trust. Do not mention specific names yet." Alexander went to his father's private study. King William was reviewing papers for the festival ceremony. He looked up with a smile when his son entered. "Alexander," the king said warmly, "are you excited about the festival? The whole kingdom will be celebrating the harvest today." Alexander sat down across from his father. Looking at the king's kind face made Alexander feel even worse about the danger that was coming. "Father," Alexander said carefully, "I have heard some talk among the servants that there might be trouble at the festival today. Nothing specific, just a feeling that something is wrong." King William frowned. "What kind of trouble? Are you worried about common criminals or something more serious?" Alexander struggled with how much to tell his father. He wanted to warn him about everything, but he also remembered Marcus's advice about needing more proof. "I am not sure," Alexander said finally. "But I would feel better if you stayed close to guards you trust today. Maybe you could ask Captain Marcus to stay right beside you during the ceremony." The king studied his son's face. He could see that Alexander was genuinely worried about something. "Son, if you know something specific, you must tell me," King William said seriously. "I cannot protect myself from a danger I do not understand." Alexander felt torn between his desire to protect his father and his promise to Marcus to wait for better proof. In that moment of hesitation, he made a choice that would haunt him later. "I think someone close to you might be planning to hurt you," Alexander said quietly. "But I do not have proof yet. Please, just be extra careful today." King William looked shocked. "Someone close to me? Alexander, these are very serious accusations. Who do you suspect?" Before Alexander could answer, there was a knock on the study door. Lord Blackwood entered without waiting for permission. Alexander felt his blood turn cold. "Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood said with a bow, "I apologize for interrupting, but we need to discuss some last-minute changes to the festival ceremony." Alexander stared at Lord Blackwood, knowing that this man was planning to kill his father. Lord Blackwood glanced at Alexander with eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Prince, Alexander was just leaving," King William said. "We will continue our conversation later, son." Alexander did not want to leave his father alone with Lord Blackwood, but he could not think of a reason to stay without seeming suspicious. As Alexander walked toward the door, he heard Lord Blackwood say, "I hope the prince is not spreading any wild stories, Your Majesty. Young people sometimes have very active imaginations." Alexander realized with horror that Lord Blackwood had been listening outside the door. The conspirator now knew that Alexander suspected something. Alexander hurried back to find Marcus. When he told the guard what had happened, Marcus's face went pale. "This changes everything," Marcus said grimly. "Now they know we are on to them. They might change their plans or move faster than we expected." "What should we do?" Alexander asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking hard about their options. "We have to assume that they will try to kill your father today, probably during the main ceremony. We also have to assume that they will try to silence us to prevent us from interfering." The Yeo festival was scheduled to begin in just 3 hours. The Great Hall was already being decorated with flowers and harvest symbols. Hundreds of people would attend, including all the suspected conspirators. "I am going to position myself where I can watch your father closely," Marcus decided. "You should stay away from the main ceremony. If something happens to the king, you will be the next target." "No," Alexander said firmly. "I will not hide while my father is in danger. We are in this together." Marcus looked at the brave young prince and felt proud of him, but he also felt terrified about what the next few hours would bring. "Then we stay close to each other," Marcus said, "and we watch everyone very carefully. At the first sign of trouble, we act to protect the king, even if we do not have complete proof." As they prepared for the festival, both Alexander and Marcus knew they were walking into a trap. The conspirators knew they had been discovered. Elena was gone, possibly dead. And somewhere in the castle, evil men were making final preparations to commit murder. The impossible choice was no longer whether to act without complete proof. The choice now was whether they could save the king's life and their own when the trap was sprung. The afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky, bringing them closer to the moment when everything would be decided. In just a few hours, the harvest festival would begin, and with it, the most dangerous day in the kingdom's history. Alexander and Marcus checked their weapons one more time and prepared to face whatever was coming. They had done everything they could to prepare. Now they had to trust in their courage and hope that it would be enough to save the kingdom from those who would destroy it. The great hall of the castle had never looked more beautiful. Golden wheat and colorful autumn leaves decorated every pillar. Long tables filled with the best food from the harvest lined the walls. Hundreds of candles made everything glow with warm light. But to Prince Alexander, the beautiful decorations looked like a trap waiting to be sprung. People began arriving at the hall 2 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to start. Alexander and Marcus positioned themselves where they could watch everything that happened. Alexander stood with a group of young nobles near the front of the hall. Marcus stayed close to the king's throne, watching every person who came near. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would watch the suspected conspirators and try to stop any attack before it happened. They had no proof that would convince a judge, but they had enough suspicion to act if they saw something wrong. King William entered the hall exactly on time, wearing his finest robes and the golden crown that had been worn by kings for 300 years. He looked happy and relaxed, smiling and waving to his people. Alexander felt sick knowing that his father had no idea how much danger he was in. Lord Blackwood followed close behind the king, as he always did during important ceremonies. He was wearing dark blue robes and carrying a leather bag that looked heavier than usual. Alexander watched the bag carefully, wondering what was inside it. The ceremony began with prayers and speeches about the successful harvest. Alexander tried to pay attention to what was happening, but his eyes kept moving around the room, looking for signs of danger. He counted the guards and tried to remember which ones he could trust. Marcus was doing the same thing from his position near the throne. He had positioned his most trusted guards around the king, but he knew that some of the guards in the room might be working for the conspirators. Every man with a weapon could be a threat. 30 minutes into the ceremony, Alexander noticed something that made his heart race. Lord Blackwood had moved closer to the king's throne. The leather bag was now open, and Alexander could see something metallic glinting inside it. Alexander tried to catch Marcus's eye, but the guard was watching a group of nobles on the other side of the room. Alexander started moving toward the throne, but the crowd of people made it difficult to move quickly. As Alexander pushed through the crowd, he heard Lord Blackwood say something to the king. The words were too quiet for Alexander to hear, but he saw his father lean forward to listen. That was when Alexander saw Lord Blackwood's hand move toward the open bag. "Marcus!" Alexander shouted, but his voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. At that moment, King William stood up to give his speech about the harvest. This was the moment the conspirators had been waiting for. When the king stood, he would be an easy target for anyone with a weapon. Alexander was still pushing through the crowd when he saw something that froze his blood. Lord Blackwood was not reaching for a weapon. Instead, he was pulling out what looked like a scroll. But behind Lord Blackwood, another man was moving forward with his hand inside his coat. The man was Sir Edmund, one of the nobles whose name had been on Elena's list. Alexander had been so focused on watching Lord Blackwood that he had not noticed Sir Edmund moving into position behind the throne. "Stop!" Alexander yelled, pointing at Sir Edmund. Marcus heard Alexander's shout and spun around to see what was happening. He saw Sir Edmund pulling a long knife from inside his coat. The blade caught the candlelight as Sir Edmund raised it toward the king's back. Marcus drew his sword and started running toward the throne, but he was too far away. Sir Edmund was only 3 steps behind the king, and his knife was already moving downward. That was when something unexpected happened. Lord Blackwood, who Alexander and Marcus had thought was the main conspirator, suddenly turned and grabbed Sir Edmund's arm. "Not yet, you fool," Lord Blackwood hissed. "Wait for the signal." Alexander realized with shock that Lord Blackwood was trying to stop the attack, not help it. But why would he stop Sir Edmund if they were working together? The answer came quickly. Lord Blackwood was not trying to save the king. He was trying to control when the king died. The conspiracy had a specific plan, and Sir Edmund was acting too early. Sir Edmund struggled with Lord Blackwood for control of the knife. In their struggle, they bumped into the king, who stumbled forward. King William turned around to see what was happening and found himself face to face with two men fighting over a knife. "Guards!" the king shouted. The great hall erupted in confusion. People started screaming and running toward the exits. Guards drew their weapons but did not know who to attack. In the chaos, it was impossible to tell who was loyal and who was a traitor. Alexander finally reached the area near the throne. He could see his father backing away from Lord Blackwood and Sir Edmund, who were still fighting over the knife. Other conspirators in the crowd were moving forward, seeing that their plan was falling apart. Marcus reached the throne at the same time as Alexander. He grabbed Sir Edmund and threw him to the ground, but the knife went flying across the floor. Lord Blackwood stepped back, his hands raised as if to show he was not a threat. "Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood said loudly, "I was trying to protect you from this assassin." Alexander stared at Lord Blackwood in confusion. Was he really trying to protect the king, or was this part of the plan? "Liar!" Sir Edmund shouted from the floor. "You are part of this too. You have been planning this for months." King William looked from one man to the other, not knowing who to believe. Around them, the chaos in the Great Hall was getting worse. More guards had arrived, but some of them might be conspirators too. That was when Alexander saw the real danger. While everyone was focused on the fight between Lord Blackwood and Sir Edmund, other conspirators were moving into position around the hall. They had planned for something like this to happen. The attack on the king was supposed to look like an accident or the work of a single crazy person. "Father, get away from here," Alexander yelled. "There are more of them." As if Alexander's words were a signal, 3 more men drew weapons from different parts of the hall. These were the real assassins. The fight between Lord Blackwood and Sir Edmund had been meant to distract everyone while the real killers got into position. Marcus saw the new threat and realized they were surrounded. The loyal guards were outnumbered and confused. The conspirators had planned this moment perfectly. "Protect the king," Marcus shouted to his men. But even as he said it, he saw that some of the guards were not moving to help. They were standing, still, watching the attack happen. Alexander grabbed his father's arm and started pulling him toward a side door, but their path was blocked by one of the conspirators, a man Alexander recognized as a frequent visitor to the castle. The man raised his sword toward the king. Alexander stepped in front of his father without thinking about his own safety. The sword was coming down toward Alexander when Marcus appeared and knocked the attacker aside. "This way," Marcus shouted, leading them toward a different exit. But as they ran toward the door, Alexander heard a sound that made his heart stop. It was the sound of Elena's voice, weak but unmistakable. "Help me," Elena called from somewhere in the chaotic crowd. Alexander turned to look for Elena and saw her near the far wall of the hall. She was alive, but she looked hurt and was being held by 2 men Alexander did not recognize. In that moment, Alexander faced an impossible choice. He could continue helping his father escape, or he could try to save Elena. Both his father and Elena were in terrible danger, and he could not help both of them at the same time. "Go with Marcus," Alexander told his father. "I have to help someone else." Before King William or Marcus could stop him, Alexander ran toward Elena. Behind him, he heard Marcus shouting his name, but he did not turn around. As Alexander pushed through the panicking crowd toward Elena, he saw that the men holding her were not trying to escape. They were using her as bait, trying to draw Alexander away from his father. The whole thing was another part of the conspiracy's plan. Alexander realized he had made exactly the choice the conspirators wanted him to make. By trying to save Elena, he had left his father with fewer protectors. Now both he and Elena were in danger, and his father was still not safe. The moment of truth had arrived, and Alexander had walked straight into the trap that had been set for him. Around him, the great hall burned with chaos and violence, and the future of the kingdom hung in the balance. Marcus watched in horror as Prince Alexander ran toward Elena and straight into the conspirators' trap. The guard faced an impossible choice. He could follow Alexander and try to protect him, or he could stay with King William and defend the throne. Every instinct told him to protect the prince, but his duty was to the king. "Take the king to safety," Marcus shouted to his most trusted guards. "Use the passage behind the throne." Marcus knew about a secret door behind the king's throne that led to a safe room. It was built long ago for exactly this kind of emergency. 2 loyal guards grabbed King William and started pulling him toward the hidden exit. But even as the king was being moved to safety, Marcus saw that the conspiracy was far bigger than they had imagined. More armed men were appearing from all directions. Some of them were castle guards who had been secretly working for the conspirators. Others were strangers who must have been smuggled into the castle earlier. Marcus drew his rifle, a weapon he rarely used but always carried during important ceremonies. A rifle was more accurate than a sword when trying to stop attackers at a distance. He had been trained to use it since he was a young soldier. The Great Hall was now a battlefield. Loyal guards were fighting with traitors. Innocent people were running and screaming, trying to escape. In the chaos, it was almost impossible to tell who was an enemy and who was a friend. Marcus tried to get a clear shot at the men who were holding Elena, but there were too many people between him and his target. If he fired his rifle in the crowded hall, he might hit innocent people who were trying to escape. Prince Alexander had reached the area where Elena was being held. Marcus could see that it was definitely a trap. More conspirators were moving to surround the prince. Alexander was fighting bravely with his sword, but he was outnumbered. Marcus started running toward Alexander, pushing through the crowd and trying to get close enough to help. But as he ran, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. A figure in a dark hooded cloak was moving through the chaos toward Prince Alexander. The figure was carrying a crossbow and moving with the skill of a trained assassin. This person was not part of the confused fighting in the hall. They had a specific target and a specific mission. Marcus raised his rifle and tried to aim at the hooded figure, but the person was moving too quickly through the crowd. Every time Marcus thought he had a clear shot, innocent people moved into his line of fire. The hooded figure was getting closer to Prince Alexander. Marcus could see that the prince had not noticed this new threat. Alexander was focused on fighting the men in front of him and trying to reach Elena. Marcus knew he had only seconds to act. The hooded assassin was raising the crossbow, aiming it at Prince Alexander. In a few more seconds, the prince would be dead. Marcus made a decision that went against all his training. Instead of waiting for a perfect shot with no risk to innocent people, he aimed at the hooded figure and prepared to fire. He knew there was a chance he might hit someone else, but he could not let the prince die. Just as Marcus was about to pull the trigger, something unexpected happened. The hooded figure stumbled and fell, and the crossbow went flying across the floor. Someone else had attacked the assassin from behind. Marcus lowered his rifle and tried to see who had saved the prince. Through the chaos, he saw a small figure, in servant's clothes, fighting with the hooded assassin. It was Elena. She had broken free from her captors and was trying to stop the attack on Prince Alexander. But Marcus's relief turned to horror when he realized what was happening. The 2 men who had been holding Elena were now running toward Prince Alexander with their weapons drawn. Elena's escape had been a distraction to get the prince to lower his guard. Marcus raised his rifle again and aimed at the 2 men attacking Alexander. This time he had a clearer shot, but just as he was about to fire, the hooded assassin got back to their feet and picked up the crossbow. The assassin was now aiming at Elena, who was still fighting on the ground and had no idea of the danger behind her. Marcus had to choose between shooting the men attacking Prince Alexander or shooting the assassin who was about to kill Elena. Marcus turned his rifle toward the hooded assassin and fired. The shot echoed through the great hall like thunder. The assassin spun around and fell, but Marcus could not tell if his shot had been fatal or not. The sound of the rifle shot seemed to freeze everyone in the hall for a moment. Even in the chaos of the battle, the loud noise made people stop and look around. In that moment of silence, Marcus heard Prince Alexander scream, "Elena!" Marcus looked toward where Elena had been fighting and saw her lying on the ground. There was blood spreading around her and she was not moving. Marcus felt a terrible fear that his rifle shot had somehow hit her instead of the assassin. Marcus ran toward Elena and Prince Alexander, pushing aside anyone who got in his way. When he reached them, He found Alexander kneeling beside Elena, trying to stop the bleeding from a wound in her shoulder. "Is she alive?" Marcus asked desperately. "Yes, but she is badly hurt," Alexander said, his voice shaking. "We have to get her help." Marcus looked around and saw that the hooded assassin was also on the ground, wounded but still alive. His rifle shot had hit the assassin in the leg, not killing them but stopping the attack. But Elena's wound had not come from his rifle. She had been stabbed by one of the men who had been holding her. "The king," Alexander said suddenly. "Where is my father? Is he safe?" Marcus looked toward the throne and saw that King William was no longer there. The loyal guards had successfully moved him to the secret passage. But the fighting in the hall was still continuing, and Marcus did not know if the king had reached safety. "I sent him to the safe room," Marcus told Alexander, "but we need to make sure he got there." As Marcus spoke, he heard footsteps running toward them. More conspirators were coming, drawn by the sound of the rifle shot. Marcus realized they were trapped in the middle of the hall with an injured Elena and no easy way to escape. "Can you carry Elena?" Marcus asked Alexander. "I think so," Alexander said, lifting Elena carefully in his arms. She was unconscious now, but still breathing. Marcus led them toward a side door, using his rifle to threaten anyone who tried to block their path. But as they moved, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. The hooded assassin that he had shot was getting back to their feet. The wound in the leg had not been as serious as Marcus had hoped. The assassin picked up the crossbow again and started following them. Marcus realized he would have to turn and fight the assassin again, but this time Prince Alexander and Elena would be right behind him. If he missed his shot, or if the assassin managed to fire the crossbow, all three of them could die. The rifle felt heavy in Marcus's hands as he turned to face the approaching assassin. He had saved the prince and Elena once, but he was not sure he could do it again. The hooded figure was moving more carefully now, staying behind cover and making it hard for Marcus to get a clear shot. Marcus knew that the next few seconds would determine whether they all lived or died. He took careful aim with his rifle, knowing that this shot might be his last chance to protect the people he had sworn to defend. The assassin raised the crossbow, and Marcus pulled the trigger. This time there was no confusion about the target and no risk of hitting innocent people. It was a direct fight between the loyal guard and the enemy who threatened everything he cared about. The rifle's turn had come, and Marcus prayed that his aim would be true. The second rifle shot rang out across the great hall, louder than the first. Marcus watched as the hooded assassin stumbled backward and fell to the ground. This time, his aim had been perfect. The crossbow fell from the assassin's hands and clattered across the stone floor. Prince Alexander, still carrying Elena in his arms, looked back at the fallen figure. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice weak with exhaustion and fear. Marcus walked carefully toward the hooded assassin, his rifle still ready in case there was any movement. When he reached the fallen figure, he knelt down and pulled back the hood to see who had been trying to kill them. What Marcus saw made him gasp in shock. The assassin was not a stranger at all. It was Thomas, the young guard who had joined Marcus's unit only 6 months ago. The same guard that Marcus had begun to suspect of being part of the conspiracy. "Thomas?" Marcus said in disbelief. "You were trying to kill the prince?" Thomas was badly wounded but still conscious. He looked up at Marcus with eyes full of pain and something that looked like regret. "I had no choice," Thomas whispered. "They have my sister. They said they would kill her if I did not do what they wanted." Marcus felt sick. Thomas was barely 20 years old, younger even than Prince Alexander. Marcus had thought the young man was eager to serve the crown, but instead, he had been forced to betray everything he believed in. "Where is your sister?" Marcus asked gently. "Hidden somewhere in the castle," Thomas said, his voice getting weaker. "They told me they would let her go if I killed the prince. They said the prince had learned too much about their plans." "Prince," Alexander moved closer, still holding Elena. "We can help you find your sister," Alexander said, "but you have to tell us who is leading this conspiracy." Thomas tried to speak, but blood was coming from his mouth. Marcus could see that the young guard was dying. Whatever information Thomas had about the conspiracy would die with him. "Please," Alexander said urgently. We need to know who is in charge. Who gave you orders? Thomas looked at Alexander with fading eyes. Not who you think, he whispered. The real leader is... But before Thomas could finish speaking, his eyes closed and he stopped breathing. The secret of who was really leading the conspiracy died with him. Marcus stood up slowly, feeling the weight of what had just happened. He had killed a young man who was probably more victim than villain. Thomas had been forced to choose between his sister's life and his duty to the crown, and he had chosen family over kingdom. We have to find his sister, Alexander said firmly. If she is still alive, we can save her. Marcus nodded, but he was also worried about something else. The fighting in the Great Hall had grown quieter, which could mean that either the loyal guards had won or that the conspirators had taken control. We need to check on your father, Marcus said. And we need to get Elena to a doctor. They made their way carefully toward the secret passage where King William had been taken. Elena was still unconscious and losing blood. Alexander was struggling to carry her, but he refused to leave her behind. When they reached the hidden door behind the throne, Marcus knocked in the special pattern that would tell the guards inside that he was a friend. After a few tense seconds, the door opened. Captain Rodriguez, one of Marcus's most trusted officers, stood in the doorway with his sword drawn. When he saw Marcus and Alexander, his face showed relief. Thank God you are safe, Rodriguez said. Is the prince hurt? I am fine, Alexander said quickly. But Elena needs help. She has been stabbed. Rodriguez led them into the safe room where they found King William sitting at a small table with 2 other guards. The king looked pale and shaken but unharmed. Alexander, King William said, jumping up to embrace his son. I was so worried about you. Marcus told me you ran into danger to help someone. This is Elena, Alexander said, gently laying her on a couch in the safe room. She is the one who discovered the conspiracy. She saved all our lives. A castle doctor was already in the safe room, having been brought there in case the king was injured. The doctor immediately began examining Elena's wounds. She will live, the doctor said after a few minutes. The wound is serious but not fatal. She needs rest and care, but she should recover fully. As the doctor worked on Elena, Marcus gave King William a full report of what had happened in the Great Hall. He explained about the conspiracy, the documents Elena had found, and the battle that had just taken place. King William listened in silence, his face growing more serious with each detail. When Marcus finished his report, the king was quiet for a long moment. How many of my people betrayed me? King William asked finally. We do not know yet, Marcus admitted. The conspiracy was larger than we thought. Some of your guards were involved and several nobles, but we still do not know who was really in charge. Alexander thought about Thomas's last words. The dying guard had said the real leader was not who they thought. But who had they been thinking of? Lord Blackwood had seemed to be protecting the king, not attacking him. So who was the real enemy? Father, Alexander said carefully, I think there is still danger. The young guard who tried to kill me said the real leader was not who we expected. The conspiracy might not be over. King William looked at his son with new respect. The events of the day had changed Alexander from a sheltered prince into someone who understood the real dangers of ruling a kingdom. What do you think we should do? The king asked Alexander. Alexander was surprised by the question. His father had never asked for his advice about serious matters before. But the events of the day had proven that Alexander could be trusted with important decisions. We should question the conspirators we captured, Alexander said. We need to find out who was really leading them and whether there are others still planning to hurt you. Marcus agreed with this plan, but he was also worried about something else that Alexander had not mentioned. Elena was now awake and listening to their conversation, though she was still very weak. Your Majesty, Elena said quietly, there is something else you need to know. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. Elena's face was pale from blood loss, but her eyes were clear and serious. While I was being held by the conspirators, I heard them talking, Elena continued. They said this attack was just the beginning. If it failed, they had other plans. What kind of other plans? Marcus asked. Elena struggled to sit up, and Alexander helped her. They have people in other parts of the kingdom, she said. If they could not kill the king here, they plan to attack the food supplies to the castle. They want to force you to leave the castle so they can attack you somewhere less protected. This news made everyone in the room realize that they were not safe yet. The conspiracy was even larger and more dangerous than they had thought. King. William looked at Marcus and Alexander. It seems the three of you have become my most trusted advisors, he said. We have a lot of work to do to root out this conspiracy and protect the kingdom. Marcus felt honored by the king's trust, but he also felt the heavy responsibility of what lay ahead. The conspiracy had people throughout the kingdom, and finding them all would be a long and dangerous task. Alexander looked at Elena, who had risked everything to save his family. Then he looked at Marcus, who had killed to protect them. The trust between all of them had been tested by fire and proven strong. But as they began planning their next moves, Alexander could not forget Thomas's last words. The real leader was not who they thought. Somewhere the true enemy was still free, still planning, and still dangerous. The conspiracy had been damaged but not destroyed. The shattered trust in the kingdom would take a long time to rebuild, and the real battle for the crown was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since the Harvest Festival attack. The castle felt different now. Guards stood at every door and no one moved through the halls without being watched. The easy trust that had once existed between the royal family and their servants was gone, replaced by careful suspicion and constant fear. Elena had recovered from her wounds and was now living in a room near the prince's quarters. King William had declared her a hero of the kingdom and given her a position as a special advisor. But Elena found her new status uncomfortable. She missed the simple life of working in the kitchen where no one expected her to make important decisions. Prince Alexander sat in his study, reading reports from investigators who were trying to find the remaining conspirators. Each report brought more disturbing news. The conspiracy had reached into every part of the kingdom. Merchants, farmers, soldiers, and nobles had all been involved in the plot to overthrow King William. But the most disturbing discovery was still the identity of the real leader. Despite weeks of questioning prisoners and searching through documents, they still did not know who had been giving orders to the conspirators. A knock on Alexander's door interrupted his reading. Captain Marcus entered carrying a folder full of new papers. "More reports?" Alexander asked, feeling tired just looking at the thick folder. "Something different this time," Marcus said, sitting down across from the prince. "We found Thomas's sister." Alexander looked up with interest. They had been searching for the young guard's sister since the day of the attack. Finding her might give them answers about who had threatened Thomas and forced him to become an assassin. "Is she alive?" Alexander asked. "Yes, but she has been through a terrible experience," Marcus replied. "She was kept prisoner in a cellar under one of the shops in the town. The people holding her told her that her brother was working for them willingly." Alexander felt sad thinking about Thomas. The young guard had died believing he was saving his sister, never knowing that the conspirators had lied to him about everything. "What did his sister tell you?" Alexander asked. Marcus opened the folder and pulled out a written statement. "She never saw the face of the person giving orders, but she heard their voice several times. She says it was someone who spoke like a noble, someone educated and used to giving commands. That could be any of the nobles we already suspected," Alexander said, feeling disappointed. "There is more," Marcus continued. "She said the leader talked about plans that would take years to complete. This conspiracy was not just about killing your father. It was about changing the entire kingdom." Alexander stood up and walked to his window. Outside, he could see people working in the castle gardens trying to return to normal life. But he knew that normal life was gone forever. Kingdom had been poisoned by betrayal and healing would take a very long time. "Marcus," Alexander said without turning around, "do you think we can ever trust people the way we used to?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. This was a question he had been asking himself every day since the attack. "I think trust has to be earned. Now," Marcus said finally. "Before we trusted people because they had titles or positions. Now we have to trust them because of what they do, not what they claim to be." Alexander turned back to face Marcus. What about us? Do you still trust me the same way you did before? This question surprised Marcus. Why would you ask that? Because I made so many mistakes, Alexander said sadly. I put Elena in danger by asking her to spy for us. I left you and my father to run into a trap. I almost got all of us killed. Marcus stood up and walked over to the prince. Alexander, you were 16 years old when this started. Most people that age are worried about games and parties. You discovered a plot to kill the king and helped save the kingdom. Yes, you made mistakes, but you also showed more courage than most adults would have shown. Alexander felt a little better hearing this, but he still carried guilt about the people who had been hurt because of his choices. What about Thomas? Alexander asked. He might still be alive if we had handled things differently. Thomas was dead the moment the conspirators decided to use his sister against him, Marcus replied firmly. They never planned to let either of them live. By fighting back, we at least saved his sister and stopped the attack on your father. A few minutes later, Elena joined them in the study. She walked more slowly than before, and still tired easily. But her mind was as sharp as ever. She had become an important part of their team, helping to analyze the information they gathered about the conspiracy. I have been thinking about something, Elena said as she sat down. Remember what Thomas said about the real leader not being who we expected? Yes, Alexander said, but we never figured out what he meant. Elena pulled out a piece of paper, covered with names and notes. I have been looking at all the evidence again. Lord Blackwood, Sir Edmund, and the other nobles we suspected were definitely part of the conspiracy, but I think they were following orders from someone else. Who? Marcus asked. Someone who was never at the meetings Elena overheard, Elena said. Someone who stayed hidden while others did the dangerous work. Alexander and Marcus looked at the paper Elena was holding. It was covered with Elena's careful handwriting, connecting different pieces of evidence they had gathered. Look at this pattern, Elena said, pointing to her notes. Every major decision the conspirators made happened after a certain person visited the castle, but that person was never mentioned in any of the documents we found. Who visited the castle regularly but stayed out of the conspiracy documents? Alexander asked. Elena looked at both men seriously. Your uncle, Prince Marcus. The room fell, silent. Prince Marcus was King William's younger brother and Alexander's favorite uncle. He had always been kind to Alexander and seemed to support the king completely. That is impossible, Alexander said immediately. Uncle Marcus loves my father. He would never hurt him. But even as Alexander said this, he remembered something that made him uncomfortable. Uncle Marcus had not been at the harvest festival. He had sent a message saying he was sick and could not attend. At the time, no one had thought this was suspicious. Elena might be right, Captain Marcus said slowly. Prince Marcus would have known all the details about the king's schedule and security. He would have been able to get information to the conspirators without anyone suspecting him. Alexander felt sick. But why would he want to kill my father? If something happened to the king, Uncle Marcus would become the heir to the throne until I came of age. He would get what he wanted without hurting anyone. Unless he did not want to wait, Elena said quietly. Or unless he thought you were too dangerous to let live. The three of them sat in silence, thinking about this terrible possibility. If Prince Marcus was really the leader of the conspiracy, then the royal family had been betrayed by one of their own. We need proof, Marcus said finally. We cannot accuse the king's brother without being absolutely certain. Over the next week, they carefully investigated Prince Marcus. They discovered that he had been visiting the castle more often than usual in the months before the attack. They found evidence that he had met privately with several of the conspirators. Most damning of all, they learned that he had large debts that could be paid off if he controlled the kingdom's treasury. When they brought this evidence to King William, the king aged 10 years in a single moment. Learning that his own brother had tried to kill him was more painful than any physical wound could have been. I will have to arrest him, King William said sadly. But it will destroy our family. The arrest of Prince Marcus happened quietly, without the public drama of a trial. When confronted with the evidence, Prince Marcus confessed to leading the conspiracy. He claimed he had been trying to save the kingdom from what he saw as his brother's weak leadership. Prince Marcus was exiled from the kingdom rather than executed. King William could not bring himself to order the death of his brother, even after such a terrible betrayal. The conspiracy was finally over, but the victory felt hollow. The kingdom was safe, but the price had been enormous. Families had been torn apart. Friends had become enemies. The simple trust that had once held the kingdom together was gone. Alexander, now 17 years old, had learned lessons about leadership that most kings never learned in a lifetime. He understood that power came with terrible responsibilities and that the people closest to you could sometimes be the most dangerous. Elena continued to serve as an advisor, but she never forgot the kitchen where she had started. She made sure that the voices of common people were heard in the royal court. Marcus remained as captain of the guards, but he was more careful now about who he trusted. He created new systems for checking the loyalty of the guards and made sure that no one person could gain too much power over the kingdom's security. Years later, when Alexander became king, he ruled with the wisdom that came from understanding the price of secrets. He created laws that protected people like Thomas's sister from being used as weapons against their families. He built a kingdom where loyalty was rewarded and betrayal was punished, but where forgiveness was also possible for those who deserved it. The Harvest Festival attack had ended with the kingdom saved and the conspiracy destroyed. But the real victory was not in stopping the immediate danger.